Okay, so I want to be clear here that this isn't broken, even though you see some stuff taken off. I've partially disassembled this so you can more clearly see what I'm going to show you. So right now it is late June of 2022. About a week ago, I think, this mower had a firmware update. So if you have a Husqvarna 435X, I assume at around the same time you also had a firmware update. And one thing I noticed is that when this was moving around the yard, especially on the more sloped sections of the yard, I would constantly get these lifted errors saying that the mower's been lifted. And so I go and I, reset the mower and get it going again, and it would move forward a few inches and then stop as if it had hit something, and then back up and try to get around this imaginary object that isn't even there. Because the mower, the lawn is perfectly clear there, but it would still stop and then back up and try to get around. And this would cause it to constantly get stuck in the more hilly or sloped sections of the yard. At first, I thought there might be an actual hardware problem. And so I was looking at like the joysticks here, wanted to make sure that, they're clean and there's no gunk in them, because if there is, it can push them over and sort of, tilt the housing and make it, make the mower think that it's colliding with something. But those are perfectly fine. There was nothing out of the ordinary about the mower. The wheels weren't gummed up with anything. I mean, you can see here they're a little dirty because it rained last night. But otherwise, the mower was fine. And then I asked around on an auto mower group on Facebook, and one other 435X owner told me he had the same problem. And it was likely because of the recent firmware update. So that got me thinking about how the actual lift and collision sensors work. What you'll see here, if you take off the covers to the front and rear housings, you see these 2, 3, 4 magnets. Those are magnets, okay? And the lift sensor is in the housing in here, okay, right under the magnets, and there's 4 of those. Now, if you were to take this to a dealer to say, well, I'm having all these errors, I'm not sure what's going on, what would happen? It would sit in a pile for weeks. The dealer doesn't know anything about electronics or semiconductors, so they probably tell you need new circuit boards and, charge you a couple $100 or more. And then your lawn's not getting cut and they're not actually solving the fundamental problem. So I want to teach you a little bit about how these sensors work. As I understand it, these are very likely Hall sensors, because there's a static magnet here and a circuit board underneath. And it's looking for a movement in the relative position of the magnet to induce a signal change to the control board. So how does a Hall sensor work? Well, let's imagine that this table here is a flat plane of silicon. Semiconducting silicon could be P-type or N-type silicon. If I have a magnetic field that's going vertically through the silicon, and if I flow current from this end to that end, that current is moving charge. The presence of that field is going to distort the direction of current flow one way or another, depending on, whether the field is pointing up or down, okay? That comes from something called the Lorentz Force. Now, as that current gets distorted toward the left or right, you're going to have a change in the voltage drop across these 2 edges of your silicon plane. So this is a small Hall sensor. That's how a Hall sensor works. So you flow current this way through a semiconductor, you have a static magnetic field, and you measure what's called a Hall voltage along these 2 opposing sides. And then if the magnet moves up or down or left or right or whatever, it's going to change how that current distorts, which is going to change your Hall voltage, and you can use that change in Hall voltage to trigger an event. For example, to tell the motors to stop turning because it thinks it collided with something, or to tell the motors to stop turning because it thinks the mower got lifted. Because if this lifts up like this, the magnet moves further away from the Hall sensor, the Hall voltage drops, oh, it must have been lifted, for example. So what did I do? I went to Home Depot and I got magnets. So, I'm sure Lowe's and other hardware stores also sell magnets. These particular ones are fairly thin. I'd say maybe 2 millimeters thick or so. They're not super thick. And they're disc magnets, and they're neodymium magnets are pretty strong. And these do have a foam adhesive, but it actually goes on the other way. This north side of the magnet here is just going to self-attract to the bottom of the south side of this magnet. So you actually have to, you might want to like take the foam adhesive off of the south end of the magnet. But anyway, all I did was I went underneath the casing here, because the magnet sits in a housing, and I just attached, where is it? Right here, sorry. It's a little dark. And I just put the magnet in here. Now the magnet's going to stick on its own because it's attracted to the magnet inside the housing. But then I just took some electrical tape and put it here just to secure it, to make sure it doesn't get jostled out of the way somehow. And I did that on all 4 magnets. So I did 2 here, there's 1 here, 1 there, and then I also did it under this housing. A little hard to see, but you don't have to take this housing off, because that requires you to do some pretty complicated things, but you can just take the wheel off and you have enough room there to put the magnet in and put some tape in and secure it. So I did also magnets under these 2. And what's that doing? Well, if you think about how this magnet is housed, it's housed in this little cup. So you have a magnet and it's in a cup, and that cup has some spacing, right? This really is part of the housing. And then when you mount this housing onto these joysticks, there's going to be a gap between the housing and this top surface here of the inner housing, and inside that is your Hall sensor. So there's a distance between the bottom of this magnet and the top of the Hall sensor. So this is your Hall sensor, and the bottom of that magnet, might be up here somewhere, relatively speaking. All I'm doing is taking another magnet and putting it down here. And that's going to strengthen the magnetic field going through the Hall sensor, which will give me a larger Hall voltage nominally, and that should reduce the likelihood that you'll get a false signal that's causing the collision and lift sensor to trip. And so I tried this out, and I set it running, and sure enough, that solved the problem. Ever since I did this, I've been running this for 2 days. It has run completely error-free. Not a single collision error or lift error at all. So that's all you got to do, right? If you actually understand how electronics work, you can solve the problem yourself. You don't need to go to a dealer and spend hundreds of dollars. This package of magnets, it comes with 5 magnets, was about 15 bucks. And, maybe Husqvarna will come out with another firmware update to address this issue, or maybe they won't. Maybe the other firmware updates won't address the issue. Either way, 15 bucks, put some magnets on there. Now you're basically permanently immune to false lift errors. Okay? And by the way, I should also point out that, yes, when you put these magnets underneath the casing here, you are reducing the physical gap between the casing, the bottom of this casing, and the top of this casing, but those magnets are thin enough that there's still some gap there, and so there's not going to be any rubbing between that magnet and the top of this casing. You have enough of a gap there, okay? But you just got to make sure you use thin magnets. These are approximately 2 millimeters thick. So do that and you're all set. Problem solved, okay? So yeah, I just wanted to let you guys know that if you have a 435X and you're having the same lift error problem, this is how you fix it. Okay? Thanks for watching.